Among the thousands of punishments Rome devised for criminals, rebels, and traitors, none carried more symbolic weight than the punishment of a Vestal Virgin. These women were not ordinary citizens. They were the guardians of Rome's eternal flame, priestesses chosen as children to embody the city's purity, devotion, and eternal bond with the gods. For centuries, the Vestals commanded extraordinary respect, living in privilege at the heart of the Forum. But with that honor came terrifying risk. If a Vestal failed in her sacred duties, or worse, if she betrayed her vow of chastity, she was not merely judged as an individual, she was judged as the embodiment of Rome itself. And Rome's punishment for a fallen Vestal Virgin was unlike any other. It was a fate so cruel, so ritualized, that even Rome's own citizens sometimes shuddered to witness it. These punishments were not simply executions. They were ceremonies, a chilling blend of law, religion, and spectacle, designed to purify the city through the suffering of one woman. The burden of sacred fire. To understand how Rome punished its Vestal Virgins, we must first understand who they were and why their vows mattered so profoundly. The Vestal Virgins were not ordinary priestesses. Selected as young girls, usually between the ages of 6 and 10, they were chosen from Rome's most noble families. To be selected was both an honor and a sentence. Once a child was given to the temple of Vesta, she ceased to be part of her family. She became property of the state, bound to 30 years of service. Her first decade was spent in training, learning rituals, prayers, and the care of Rome's most sacred flame. Her second decade was spent in active duty, performing the rites that kept the fire burning and safeguarding the rituals of the goddess Vesta. Her final decade was spent as a teacher, passing her knowledge to the next generation. The fire was no ordinary flame. It was the eternal hearth of Rome, a symbol of the city's life force. If it went out, it was believed that Rome itself was in mortal danger. Thus, the Vestals bore the weight of the Republic's destiny in their small, delicate hands. In exchange for their sacred duties, the Vestal Virgins enjoyed privileges rare for Roman women. They lived in the House of the Vestals, a grand residence in the Forum. They were attended by servants, granted seats of honor at games, and freed from their father's authority. They could own property, make wills, and move freely in public without a guardian, liberties denied to most women in Rome. Even their presence carried divine authority. If a condemned man happened to encounter a Vestal on the way to execution, he could be pardoned on the spot. If she touched a slave, he was considered free. They were walking embodiments of divine purity, treated with awe and reverence. Yet beneath these privileges lay a constant threat. Because the Vestals represented the purity of Rome itself, any failure, any lapse in duty was considered not merely a personal sin, but a crime against the gods. There were two crimes that could doom a Vestal Virgin. The first was allowing the sacred flame to go out. To Romans, this was no accident. It was a sign of neglect, a failure that jeopardized the city's covenant with its gods. When the flame died, Rome trembled. Enemies at the gates, famine, or civil unrest were all blamed on such failures. The punishment was severe. The negligent Vestal was scourged, beaten, often in secret, to preserve some semblance of dignity. But the second crime was far worse, breaking the vow of chastity. A Vestal was sworn to 30 years of absolute purity. To break that vow was to pollute not only her own body, but the spiritual body of Rome. The gods were believed to recoil from such pollution, and the city feared divine retribution. Thus, when a Vestal was accused of unchastity, the trial and punishment that followed were not merely about one woman's behavior. They became public dramas of religion and politics, testing the bond between Rome and the divine. The trial of a Vestal Virgin was unlike any other. Ordinary citizens were tried in courts of law. Senators were tried before their peers, but Vestals were tried before the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, who embodied both spiritual and political authority. The trial was solemn, ritualized, and often shrouded in secrecy. Witnesses were called, but the evidence could be tenuous. Sometimes accusations of unchastity were tools of politics, weapons wielded by ambitious men seeking to disgrace rivals by tarnishing the purity of a Vestal associated with them. The accused Vestal stood alone, her reputation pitted against the judgment of Rome's most powerful men. If found guilty, there was no appeal, no exile, no ordinary execution. For to spill the blood of a Vestal Virgin was considered sacrilege. She was too sacred to be put to death by sword or noose. Instead, Rome devised a punishment that killed without spilling blood, a punishment that became one of the most chilling rituals in Roman history. The condemned Vestal was led to a place called the Campus Sceleratus, the field of transgression, near the Colline Gate. Here, a small underground chamber had been prepared, a tomb that was not quite a tomb, for it contained a lamp, a bed, and a little food and water. The fiction was clear. Rome would not kill the Vestal. Rome would merely shut her away, leaving her to die naturally. Thus, the city avoided the stain of blood while still ridding itself of pollution. The procession was grim. The Vestal was dressed as if for burial, veiled and silent. She was carried in a covered litter so the crowd could not see her face, for to gaze upon the condemned was considered a bad omen. As she was led to the chamber, priests chanted and officials turned away their eyes, ashamed of what was about to occur. The condemned descended the ladder into the dark cell. She was given the small provisions, tokens to maintain the legal fiction that her life was not being deliberately taken. Then the entrance was sealed with earth. There, in darkness and silence, the sacred Virgin of Vesta was abandoned to starvation and death. The punishment of a Vestal Virgin was unique because it was both a ritual and a paradox. It sought to destroy while appearing not to kill. It was designed not merely to end a life, but to cleanse a city. For the people of Rome, the burial of a Vestal was a terrifying spectacle. It reminded them that even the purest could fall, that even the guardians of the gods were vulnerable to corruption. And it reassured them that Rome, however brutal, knew how to purge its sins. The death of one woman, locked beneath the earth, was meant to preserve the life of the entire city. When the sacred fell, trials of the Vestals. For centuries, the Vestal Virgins stood as Rome's untouchable priestesses, paragons of purity, guardians of the hearth, embodiments of divine favor. But history records that some of these women, accused of betraying their vows, fell into the abyss of public disgrace and ritual death. Their stories reveal not only the weight of religious duty, but also the dark intersection of politics, rumor, and fear. When a Vestal was condemned, it was never just about chastity, it was about power. One of the earliest recorded scandals of the Vestals occurred in 337 BCE, when a priestess named Minutia was accused of unchastity. The evidence? She dressed too elegantly and associated too freely with men. In Rome's suspicious eyes, her attire and demeanor hinted at corruption. Brought before the Pontifex Maximus, Minutia was condemned and buried alive at the Campus Sceleratus. Her case shows how fragile the Vestals' reputations were. Not only their bodies, but their very appearance was scrutinized for signs of impropriety. To walk too proudly, to dress too finely, was enough to stoke whispers that could end in the tomb. Perhaps the most infamous Vestal trial erupted in 114 BCE, when three of the priestesses, Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia, were accused of betraying their vows. The charges shook Rome to its core. For three Vestals to be accused simultaneously was unprecedented, and the city trembled at the thought that divine wrath would fall upon them all. At first, the trial was handled quietly. Two of the accused, Licinia and Marcia, were acquitted, while Aemilia was condemned and buried alive. But rumors persisted, and political pressure mounted. Soon, the case was reopened. This time, Licinia and Marcia were also found guilty. The scandal revealed the deep connection between politics and religion in Rome. The second trial was driven less by evidence than by fear and outrage. fear that sparing guilty priestesses would provoke the gods, and outrage that the first trial had been too lenient. Ultimately, all three Vestals were entombed alive. Their alleged lovers, aristocrats accused of seducing them, were flogged to death in the Forum. The city witnessed a cleansing through ritual blood and silence. The most famous and tragic case was that of Cornelia, the chief Vestal Virgin, condemned under the Emperor Domitian in AD 91. Cornelia was a woman of high birth and impeccable reputation who had served faithfully for decades. Yet in Domitian's Rome, accusations of immorality were often political weapons. Domitian, a ruler notorious for paranoia, accused Cornelia of unchastity. Historians like Pliny the Younger record that she was led to her living tomb, protesting her innocence. As she descended, her robe caught on the ladder, and when the executioner moved to assist her, she recoiled, refusing even the touch of a man in her final moments. She maintained her dignity until the end, declaring that she had been faithful both to her vows and to Rome. Cornelia's condemnation is remembered not as proof of her guilt, but as proof of Domitian's cruelty. Even Roman contemporaries saw her trial as a sham, a political purge disguised as piety. Yet the ritual went forward, for even an emperor needed the theatre of religion to justify his tyranny. These cases reveal the deeper truth. The punishment of Vestals was never only about chastity, it was about the health of the state. When disasters struck, military defeats, famines, plagues, suspicion often turned toward the Vestals. If Rome was suffering, surely the gods had been angered, and what better scapegoat than the women whose duty was to keep divine favor intact? Accusations often came in moments of political turmoil. The 114 BCE scandal erupted during instability in Rome's wars abroad. Cornelia's condemnation came during Domitian's tightening grip on power. To condemn a Vestal was to demonstrate to the people that Rome was purging itself of impurity, restoring divine balance. It was religion turned into performance, with the Vestal as the tragic centerpiece. Each time a Vestal was condemned, the ritual repeated itself. The chamber was prepared with chilling precision: a bed, a lamp, a loaf of bread, a pitcher of water, a token meal, symbols to preserve the fiction that she was not being executed but abandoned to fate. The procession through Rome was silent and eerie. Citizens averted their eyes, yet thousands would gather to watch. The Pontifex Maximus led the ceremony, but even he would not descend into the chamber. The sacred priestess was left alone to meet her end. When the earth closed over her, the crowd dispersed in solemn silence, reassured that Rome had been cleansed. But whispers lingered. Was she truly guilty, or merely a victim of politics? For the remaining Vestals, these punishments served as both terror and warning. They lived in privilege, but always under scrutiny, their lives a delicate balance between honor and annihilation. To stumble was to risk the most dreaded fate in Rome: burial alive. For the Roman people, the spectacle served a different purpose. It reminded them that the gods watched constantly and that purity must be preserved at any cost. It reinforced the idea that Rome's greatness depended not just on armies and laws, but on the unseen flame of divine favor carried in the bodies of its priestesses.